What was life like on a slave ship during the transatlantic slave trade? Well, that's something that I've been asking myself over and over again. I want you to imagine being ripped from everything you know, your family, your village, and your freedom, shackled and packed into the darkness of a ship like a cargo. You're all surrounded by strangers who are just as terrified as you are. The air is thick, the space is suffocating, and hope feels like a distant dream. This was the grim reality of millions of Africans during the transatlantic slave trade. So in this video, we're diving into the unimaginable life on slave ships. It's a story of suffering, resilience, and a dark chapter in human history we must never forget. So please don't blink. Let's dive into history. The journey into slavery didn't begin on the ships, rather it started long before. European traders didn't venture deep into Africa, but they relied on local rulers and merchants to capture people from rival villages. These captives were marched for miles, often barefoot, across unforgiving terrain, where many died before even reaching the coast. And to those who survived, they found themselves at the mercy of trading posts along the West African coastline. Too sad. Places like Elmina Castle and Gore Island is where they were examined like livestock, stripped of their dignity and traded for guns, textiles, and other goods. Sadly for the captives, stepping aboard the ship marked the beginning of a nightmare and their last foot on the African soil. The ship started sailing on the Atlantic Ocean, known as the Middle Passage, which was a harrowing ordeal because enslaved Africans were crammed below deck in spaces so tight they could even barely sit up. Men were usually shackled together in rows, while women and children were often kept separately. I remember the air below the deck, which was so foul, filled with the stench of human waste, vomit, and sweat, because there was no ventilation and the heat was unbearable. Many fell sick from diseases like dysentery, smallpox, and malaria, which spread so quickly in these conditions, killing so many of them. To prevent total despair and to keep their cargo alive, captains forced enslaved people to exercise. Above the deck, they were made to dance in chains under the watchful eyes of armed crew members. This so-called exercise was less about care and more about profit. Remember, healthier individuals fetched higher prices at auction, so they had to fight hard so that they can survive. But these moments on deck didn't mean relief. So many captives were whipped for refusing to eat or resisting orders. Women faced additional horrors as they were often subjected to sexual violence by the crew. And during the night, the cries of the tormented filled the ship's hull. A chorus of anguish and African chanting songs of freedom and hope started roaming around the Atlantic Ocean. Despite the overwhelming odds, many enslaved people resisted. Some revolted, attacking the crew and attempting to take control of the ship. Others chose a different kind of freedom, and that was leaping into the ocean to escape their captures and the pain. One of the most famous revolts occurred aboard the slave ship in 1839 in what is known as La Amistad, when Africans led by Saint-Pierre, better known as Sink, successfully took control of the vessel. But unfortunately, most rebellions were brutally suppressed, with captives facing merciless punishments, including being thrown overboard as a warning to others. Death was a constant companion on the slave ships, and it is estimated that up to 20% of enslaved Africans died during the Middle Passage. The bodies of the dead, or those too sick to survive, were thrown overboard without ceremony. For the crew, this was a calculated loss, and for the enslaved, it was another reminder of their inhuman treatment, which made the Atlantic Ocean a vast and unmarked graveyard for millions. After weeks or even months at the sea, the surviving captives arrived in the Americas, very weak, malnourished, and traumatized, but sadly, they were immediately prepared for auction. Families were separated, languages and cultures were suppressed, and their identities were stripped away. For those who endured the journey, the nightmare was far from over. They faced a lifetime of enslavement, hard labor, and dehumanization on plantations across the New World. We should all remember that the transatlantic slave trade was one of the darkest chapters in human history. Over 12 million Africans were forcibly taken from their homes, with countless lives lost along the way. The legacy of this brutal trade still echoes today, shaping the societies we live in and reminding us of the resilience of those who survived. It's also important to remember their stories, not just as a history lesson, but as a call to action, a call to confront injustice, honor the strengths of those who endured, and ensure such atrocities are never repeated. Well, if you have reached the end of this video, thank you for watching and for remembering this history with me. If this video moved you, please share it so others can learn and reflect, because together we can keep these stories alive. Bye-bye.